Hi, April.
Hi, Jackie.
It's so nice to see you again, even though this time it's on Zoom.
Yes, it is nice to be able to see you in person because it usually means I'm in Toronto.
Yes, yes. Last time I saw you was a really interesting, it was a fascinating panel about psychedelics. And we covered a lot in that panel, but I am addicted to your newsletter. So I follow everything that you're doing and what you say because I'm a big proponent of psychedelics for a lot of like issues that women have with mental health. And I've tried them myself, as you know. And yeah, I saw your last newsletter about menopause and psychedelics. And I thought, I need to have you join me for a conversation about this.
Yeah, I think it's appropriate for your audience and your mission.
So I know the newsletter was promoting a podcast you had done on this. And I just wanted to start off by asking you what made you interested in looking at the correlation between the benefits of psychedelics and menopause specifically?
Probably a three-prong answer. The first is that I am perimenopausal. So I've had a very regular period, fortunately, really since my kids have been born. It got me regular for some reason. And in the last year and a half, that has not been the case, right? Which is obviously an indication that, things are changing in my body. I'm kind of like, whoa, how did we get here already? I just figured out who I am and how to take care of myself. And now I got to learn it all over again. So there's that personal interest. And also my mom is only 18 years older than me. And so she went through menopause in my adult memory. I mean, I was in my 30s and had my first kid when she was going through menopause. She had to white knuckle it. Like there was no HRT. A lot of doctors were still operating under the assumption that hormones would lead to cancer. And so she had to turn her life upside down. It was no caffeine, no sugar, lots of exercise, tons of water. It's actually when she adopted self-help, she was like, is this what you would call self-help? She's an older generation, so she's like doesn't take care of herself in those ways. And I just remember thinking, wow, this must be pretty impactful. She's health conscious, but she's really doing extreme things, only fruits and vegetables. And so I just have a lot of empathy for women who have gone through this without the support that I know my generation has. So as part of that, I think the best way we can support our peers is to be transparent about our own experiences, right? I've learned that in cannabis. Sharing your story helps other women who may have a similar story start to connect dots. So, yeah, the personal. And then the other part of this is I am committed to women's health research in cannabis and psychedelics. That is an area of interest that came through working in the cannabis space for the last decade and in psychedelics in the last 4 years. And just hearing women's stories, and yet we have no evidence, no clinical evidence to support what we hear is helping them. To the fact that we don't have a direct correlation of how not one psychedelic impacts female hormones is. So there's a researcher, her name is Dr. Grace Blessed Hopley, and she is in the UK, and she works with King's College London. This is the name of her organization, and she works to design studies and to research female hormones within the context of psychedelics and cannabis. She has a study. It's free. You can sign up for it, and you answer 4 surveys throughout a 12-week cycle, and they're working with women, or they're getting feedback from women who are microdosing any substance to mitigate symptoms related to perimenopause and menopause. So I had her as a guest on my podcast, and I thought, the easiest way for me to help another woman that's trying to help women is to sign up for the study and then talk about how microdosing is impacting me. And I had just signed up for Substack. I've had a really robust newsletter for a long time, but I migrated it over to Substack at the beginning of April. I'm like, this is kind of great because I want to encourage other women to sign up. She needs data. There are women all around me that are grasping for, what do I do? How do I do it? They know I am into psychedelics, but I know a lot about psychedelics. And so they're asking me these questions, and I'm like, I don't really feel like I have answers for you, right? But I can put together enough information from people who do, where you can start to know what to ask your doctor. You can start to know what to be looking for in yourself. One of the core resources that I send people to is an interview that I did with Jennifer Chesick, who wrote the Psilocybin Handbook for Women. And she's taken a very strong interest in psilocybin and menopause. So I was lucky enough to interview her as she's really thought through this convergence, this topic. She goes through 4 things in midlife or menopause that psilocybin could be helpful for, like symptoms that we as women are experiencing that psilocybin could help mitigate, reduce, et cetera. It's on YouTube, and it is a fascinating interview. Again, we don't have any clinical evidence, but as right before we started taping, I mentioned that I've been experiencing just like what I now know is anxiety, right? I was diagnosed with ADHD 10 years ago. And so I didn't know that I had anxiety because it's just been my whole life. It's just like, oh, I've got this loop going on in my head and talking myself out of the thoughts that I'm having about myself or about a situation. I know exactly. Meditation is a good way to help with that. Journaling is a good way to help with that. I got divorced 4 years ago, and it was really best case scenario, but it still has really impacted my mental health because I didn't have a picture of what my future should look like. And so I had to start over again in my late 40s. And there was no picture of the future without these 3, 1 man and 2 boys. And it just turned everything upside down for me in ways that I've been really, really surprised, but I didn't realize it was really happening at the same time I was going through perimenopause, and that there were that maybe the ways and the anxiety that I'd had throughout my life would be exacerbated and be beyond some of the tools that I had. So anxiety in midlife and as a result of hormone fluctuations is something that's proven to be very real for me. And so I have been microdosing, and I do find it helpful. I am also now on a low dose birth control pill, and I have not been on any hormonal birth control, since I was 22, because I didn't like how it made me feel then. And I know that there's something connected to my ADHD, because we know that hormonal fluctuations are very much impact your ADHD symptoms. So I'll be curious to see if this intervention is something that, for long-term microdosing has done for me, because it hasn't allowed my anxiety to subside. Like that is something that I need extra help for, I guess.
Right.
But I've been able to become much more introspective about where, like, what do you think this anxiety is here for a reason, right? It is not serving you, but it is allowing you to look at things in a very extreme way and wonder and get curious about why you're having these thoughts. Why do you have a whole life to look back on and realize that there's nothing but success and friendship? Like, it's been a pretty fucking lucky life from start to finish. And the things that may have been challenging when you get older, you look back and go, oh, there was a reason for that. I'm so grateful. So I really feel like taking the time, and my company is called SET, and I partner with a licensed therapist to create a 12-week microdosing protocol, psilocybin microdosing protocol. Love what she has written. And I am doing that 12 weeks in conjunction with the study that Dr. Grace Blessed Hopley has created. Yeah, exactly. And so taking the time every single week to go through our protocol and to go through the reflection questions and the exercises and being very intentional about this 12-week period is how I think I've gotten to, I have to do something about my hormones. Clearly there is a force bigger than me that is at play here. I've also felt very stuck at work. with my set. And I thought that this time would really help to focus in on what I'm doing, what I'm interested in. Is it helping? How am I not helping people? What more can I do? Just really feeling like I'm a founder, right? Like sometimes you feel like you got it all taken care of, and sometimes you're like, oh my
Yeah.
goodness, what is next, right? And so yeah, I've been really, really grateful. But I wanted to take this time to talk about some of the stuff that Jennifer shared with me in terms of what
Yes.
women are experiencing in menopause and how psilocybin may be able to, yeah, to help with some of those, I guess we'll call them symptoms. Yeah.
I'm really curious about that because I know that I've tried quite a few things. You and I have talked before, and I have told you I can't be on hormone therapy,
Mhm.
which I feel like is sort of outdated information. But again, we are dealing with outdated information on the
Wow.
daily. But there's so many things that can happen to our body from the change of hormones. Hot flashes are just the generic one everybody knows about, but not everybody gets a hot flash. So it's a super confusing time. Perimenopause, where you are. I mean, I had my daughter late and I went through early menopause. So there was this couple of years where I should have been locked away. Like my husband was like, oh my God, I need a hurt locker outfit. Like I was sleep deprived, but I was going through peri and no one told me anything. And so I feel for what you're going through. I am postmenopausal now, almost 10 years, but my anxiety's been super bad lately. Now, not like your situation with your divorce, but we're moving. We went through a 5-week period of chaos. In order to do it, that's when I chose to go off my SSRI, my anti-anxiety, because I really wanted to commit to microdosing. But with everything that was going on, I don't think there are enough psychedelics in the world that could have helped that situation. But now that, we're in a groove, we're moving in a few weeks, and like when I land and when I get sorted again, I do want to dial down the SSRI and go back to the microdosing because for me, I found it did help with the calmness. The anxiety was still there, but it was lower level for sure.
Yeah.
So, but as far as symptoms related to menopause specifically, I hadn't even considered it until I saw your newsletter about your conversation. So, yeah, please share Jennifer's 4 things because I'm curious as to what those symptoms are going to be.
Well, the first is depression, right? So even women who don't have a history of depression, they can experience new or worsened symptoms because of our hormone fluctuations, especially when it comes to declining estrogen. Estrogen binds to serotonin receptors, help make us happy, right? SSRI, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. So when there's not as much estrogen to bind to those receptors, then where the neurotransmitters that go through the system, we'll call it the system, will not be able to fill you up in the way that they once did naturally. So that's when, and we'll get to this a little bit later, that's when we start reaching for other things to fill those holes. Psilocybin can help build or support emotional resilience that allow women, like I was saying, I'm just being very introspective and going, there's going to be highs and lows. I've done this before. How is it different today or at this period in my life? And I feel like microdosing psilocybin has brought in a level of compassion that I rarely have for myself. I can be very, very hard on myself. And I didn't know that that wasn't something that, was like common among people. Like, aren't we supposed to be our best? Okay, these are the ways that you're not being your best. Go figure it out. And I think that psilocybin in these last few weeks, if nothing else, it's allowed me to speak my fears out loud and have other people tell me I should be less hard on myself. So I'm like, oh, okay, this is a thing. You're not going around wondering all the ways you can optimize every thought and move. All right, maybe I just need to relax, right? So, yeah. And so psilocybin, there's now clinical trials that show that one large dose of psilocybin can minimize and negate symptoms of depression for up to a year. That's incredible, right? And this is not with the help of a pharmaceutical intervention. This is completely on its own. So there's there's something, we don't quite know what it is. If it is opening up a channel for you, it is allowing you to see, have a different perspective. There's a lot more gratitude that can come as a result of a large psilocybin experience. I think it's also important to know that depending on where your hormones are, will have an impact on how particularly a large dose experience will take hold. So the most optimal time in our cycle to welcome in a large dose experience is right in the middle. So I believe that's called the luteal phase. And that's because that is when you're ready to conceive. All your hormones are in exactly the right balance. You are more likely to have a higher libido. Your body is just more flush with all of the, I guess, nutrients, right? The endogenous hormones that make us ready to do what our bodies are really intended to do, which is procreate. So choosing that time to go to a retreat or to take a macrodose is going to result in less likelihood of an adverse experience, which we don't talk a lot about
Mhm.
as a community in psychedelics, because there's this fear that we will undo some of the progress that's been made by talking about when things go bad. But the reality is that 1 in 5 people do have an adverse experience when they are under the influence of psychedelics. And it can take up to a year to unpack what happened and how to move on from it. It's critical that we talk about it. So women are more likely to have an adverse experience. And again, we don't have proof of this, but it is highly likely that it is because we are consuming psychedelics at a time that our cycle is really not going to be supportive for that.
We should clarify that when you're talking about like a large dose would be like a psychedelic journey, like a guided, it's psychedelic. Whereas microdosing, you're not going to feel the psychedelic effects. The way I could explain microdosing is nothing happened, which means nothing happened. Like at the end of the day, I remember Irie Selkirk gave me a dose one day, a microdose. And my husband and I got rid of my daughter, sent her to my parents. We split it. And we were like, "Oh, no, we have to go and get something from the drugstore." I'm like, "I can't go. I just took this." And he's like, "I can't go. I just took this. We're going to be like all woo woo in a minute." And nothing happened. We were sitting around going, "Okay, I'm just going to go." And then I said that to Irie later. And she's like, "But that's the point. Nothing happened. You didn't feel the anxiety you normally feel. Maybe you didn't feel the depression. Maybe it's the lack of something that happened that you feel." Does that make sense? That's kind of how
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
feel about it, because you're not gonna feel anything psychedelic or strange. You're just gonna feel something was not happening, something negative was not happening to me.
I mean, leave it to Irie to say exactly the right thing. And I have never heard of it in that way, actually. We say if you don't feel anything, then you're doing it right.
Yes.
But, and also, if you don't feel perhaps negative feelings that you're used to feeling, that's an
Mhm.
indication of the fact that it's working. Yeah.
So anyway, I just wanted to clarify that, like, when people hear psychedelics and microdosing, they expect to feel a little bit of a lift or something,
Yeah.
some sort of a hallucinogenic effect, but in fact, that is not the case.
No, it's true. I'm glad that you shared that addition, though. The other thing that happens, the second thing that happens during these years is female sexual dysfunction. So, low libido, vaginal dryness, pain during sex, difficulty orgasming, and psilocybin can help by boosting our body image, enhancing our connection and communication with our intimate partner, and potentially increasing libido. There's a woman here in Seattle who has been a legacy manufacturer of very high quality psilocybin products for over 2 decades. In
Oh,
fact, they created a technology and a protocol to extract psilocybin from mushrooms. It keeps all of its constituents, including the active ingredients of psilocin and psilocybin. They put this powder into value add products like tinctures and capsules. And they were creating something else, but the tincture, it's a bitters. I shouldn't say tinctures, it's a bitters. So it is in a tincture bottle, and you add it to your sparkling waters, how I like to use it. And she was telling me that she adds it to her sparkling water and it does help with that initiating desire, right? Wanting to be intimate, having your libido sort of perk up. And I too have found that to be true. I am a highly sexual being and have been more so, I think, in my 30s and early 40s. And in just the last couple of months, I've noticed like, you know, I'm not, my libido is not as high as it has been the last few years. And so when I take a microdose using these bitters, I do notice I'm like, oh, okay, I'm still alive
Yeah.
down there and, all around.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's great news because libido is a really, really tough one. And then, just to connect that to menopause, obviously it is connected to menopause, but you
Yeah.
see a high divorce rate in menopause. 10 years in, I'm like, it's no surprise. If you can't manage it, you basically turn into roommates. And it can be really, and then the mood swings and depression and anxiety, like that can take a toll on any relationship. So
Yeah.
having something to help with libido would be amazing.
Yeah. Pharmaceutical interventions to help with women's libido. So,
Yeah, this was the recent FDA panel that talked about women's health and the concerns about hormone therapy and the fact that we need scientific and evidence-based answers, not outdated beliefs and fears.
yeah. And also, in some cases, we now have the medical evidence that we need, yet it hasn't been updated with the FDA. And so the FDA is still making recommendations that are outdated. So, yeah, some pretty basic shit.
That's really, really. If you give men something called Viagra, like we deserve something too, because how are we going to come together if only one of us has a libido? Just
Yeah.
crazy, just some simple math there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true.
Okay.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that there's not a man that I know that wouldn't agree that having an engaged partner is way better. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, we're all happier, but yeah, maybe the FDA will come up to the times soon.
Yeah. Exactly. So okay, so when Jennifer shared this, it was a big moment for me. She said that trauma is the third, I guess, condition
Okay.
that in menopause, that if it is unresolved trauma from earlier in our life that we don't take care of, that just like it can impact the severity of our periods, it can also impact the severity of our symptoms in menopause. So
Oh,
there is past trauma, like ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, that correlates with worse menstrual symptoms and perimenopausal symptoms. So, psilocybin, it can reduce psychological distress associated with those experiences, help us modulate our stress response. And so, moving into a protocol, whether it's a microdosing protocol with psilocybin or working with somebody to have a higher dose experience related to maybe a specific trauma that you know that you have, but you have suppressed dealing with it because it's hard, right?
well,
That
not
actually,
everybody knows how to deal with it. Like
right?
some people just think it's buried, it's gone, and they don't even recognize triggers anymore.
So doing that, a lifetime of doing that could mean that during menopause, what rears its ugly head is going to be much more severe than if we take this time where we can tap back into our intuition and self-compassion and get really introspective about why we are the way that we are. It could actually impact how the symptoms of menopause are showing up for us.
That is fascinating.
It makes a
It
lot of
does
sense
make
to me.
sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. I did a journey over a year ago now in Jamaica with Irie, and
Right.
the trauma, like childhood trauma, was involved in that. And it was so fascinating. It was the best thing I've ever done for myself, mental health wise. What I noticed, even past a year, is that it's easier to be introspective now. I think because
Mm.
I had that experience during my journey and I can easily let my brain go there now, but it really did unravel a lot of things for me in a very positive way. It was sort of emotional when it was happening, but as time has gone on, even if I take a little bit of cannabis and I get a little bit high, I feel like I can become a little more introspective. And it's fascinating. I'll journal it all the time because I learn so much more when I do that. But I never had that experience before, and I love it because it's a great way to increase your self-awareness, but also to tackle some of those things that have happened that you really struggled with suppressing. And when they come up, you have more tools now, or you just have more resilience.
Yes, exactly. Like we were saying earlier before, how psilocybin can help support emotional resilience, right? When depression comes up. So I think that's true too, if you're trying to work through, because trauma isn't always self contained. If there's somebody else that's either traumatized you or you saw trauma inflicted on somebody else. I mean, really, at the end of the day, we're responsible for ourselves. But when it is complex and there are other people involved and learning, how do I navigate this? Likely people that I love, it
Yeah.
does, you need to take time and really think through, how do I take care of this for myself? Because I don't know if bringing other people into this journey is going to actually be productive. So I just have to figure out how to take care of it for myself. And I find that cannabis and psychedelics are both really helpful for that.
Yeah. Yeah. I found it to be like both of them have a different, like a different effect, but like similar benefits sometimes. There's some crossover there. So,
Yes. Yeah. The last, well, the
forward.
last thing, the last thing that, the last thing she shared is also personal, and that's compulsions and addictions. So, perimenopause can bring compulsive behavior, disordered eating, alcohol, sugar use, as women try to manage emotional dysregulation brought on by our hormonal fluctuations. So, basically, when you are in premenstrual syndrome every day, you're going to turn to the old things that you did to manage feeling dysregulated. You overeat, disorder, or you don't eat enough, right? Like we all have. So if you have a history, like I was anorexic when I was in high school, it would be very, very likely that I would fall back into an old habit. And my ADHD was undiagnosed. It's not really surprising that I turned to controlling my food when my life felt so out of control. So as I'm,
Ah,
dealing with the same exact situation, hormonal dysregulation and work with ADHD symptoms, now I'm medicated for my ADHD, which I know helps a lot. But I am so grateful for the work that I have been able to do in the decades in between, because I'm not going to turn to some of those old tools or ways of responding to stress.
yeah.
But it's highly likely that if you haven't addressed some of that behavior, that it will rear its ugly head. And like I was saying earlier, as our estrogen decreases, when estrogen falls away, we got to fill the hole with something else to help make us be happy. So if you're
Ah,
already a drinker, I mean, I talk to a lot of women who are in their 20s who are watching their moms drink a lot more than they did when they were growing up. I myself, and alcohol is not something that I'm likely going to have issues with. I have used it more than I needed to earlier in my life with social anxiety for sure, but I
yeah.
reset my relationship with alcohol. Cannabis is something that I really have to manage. I think that it's because it helps me with my anxiety immediately, right? So,
Yeah.
and that doesn't mean that that's how I should be dealing with my anxiety, because it brings on, other things. When I learned this through Jennifer, I became more committed to my intentional use of cannabis. When I talked to Dr. Grace Hopley Best, she was saying that in our late 30s, the likelihood of women developing psychosis increases tremendously. And at the same time, men's likelihood drops. It's correlated. I mean, it's not correlated, but there is
Yeah.
it's an inverse reaction or inverse likelihood. And so I said, oh, okay. Psychosis, I'm thinking to myself, that's like, and unfortunately, I recently saw a woman at a crosswalk and she had a walker and her pants were around her ankles.
Oh,
And that is what I think of when I think of psychosis. I think of a person who is not aware of even what's happening with their body.
Yeah.
I think of something
Yeah.
very extreme. And Dr. Grace Bless-Hopley was like, no, it can be ruminating thoughts over and over and over. And I was like, oh my God, I think I've been in psychosis for 10 fucking years.
Yeah, I think I
Seriously?
have to join you in that. Like, I have ADHD, but I ruminate all the time. I mean, I know like menopause and peri, like we start to wake up at 3 a.m. and, how did we screw our kids up? What have we done to the world? What's left? Will I have enough money to live? But even before that, like in my 20s, I was a ruminator. Like things would go through my brain over and over and I wouldn't let them go. I still do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that is an indication of psychosis, which for
Great.
me, cannabis definitely exacerbates a
Yeah.
lot of magical thinking. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I have to be pretty careful for that reason too.
Yeah.
So, and that's a compulsion, right? And OCD is comorbid with ADHD. So, and anorexia is OCD, right? So, psilocybin is being studied for alcohol use disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, disordered eating, right? So, we know that
Yeah.
psilocybin helps with what happens in those particular, well, obsessive compulsive disorder is a result of an overactive default mode network in our mind, in our brain. Our motherboard is called the default mode network, the DMN, and it's really the seat of our ego and where all of the stories that we tell ourselves or about the world, about certain people, it's where it all originates. And a lot of times those thoughts are not our own. We've been conditioned to believe them. And so at a certain point in our life, those stories are totally outdated, yet we're still running plays based on this old playbook, that
Yeah.
it doesn't.
Yeah.
So psilocybin helps to quiet. All psychedelics do this. Also, time in nature helps to do this. Sleep helps to do this. But we quiet our default mode network, and then it allows us to operate from a place that isn't the same thinking looping over and over again. So, yeah, so those are the four things that Jennifer shared with me. They all really make sense. And psychedelics can be helpful with these symptoms, depending on individual situations. I'm not a medical expert. I talk to a lot of them and I'm sharing like directly.
Uh,
Jennifer is also not a medical expert. She's a health journalist who wrote the book on psilocybin for women. But yeah, I hope that this information helps others connect some dots for what may be happening in their life and give them another approach to try to get to the bottom of maybe why they're thinking or doing things that are not serving them.
It's amazing because there's still such a stigma. Like I'm in Canada, obviously, around it. There's a fear of losing control or what could happen with a higher dose. You mentioned earlier talking to your doctor. I will say to the Canadian audience, you can't talk to your doctor about this here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're not there yet. In fact, I can't even talk to my doctor about cannabis as an option. I'm sure it's an insurance reason and it's not their field of study, so they're not comfortable recommending it. But I do implore women to look into this more because the benefits I have found to be incredible outside of menopause. But menopause is what we're really talking about because we're all going to go through it. It's the 100% club. And, for the lucky ones who don't really struggle, that's great. But most of us struggle. And it's not just the physical changes, right? Like we focus so much on the physical changes, weight gain and things like joint pain. But for me, I can handle all of that. It's the mental health changes that I struggle with.
I haven't had any of the physical issues. Fortunately, that hasn't been how this has manifest for me, but the mental health stuff is strong. Yeah.
Very strong. And we don't hear a lot about it, but I know in the UK press, they do talk about higher suicide rates. Women are still suffering in silence. So these conversations are really important because, like you said in the beginning of our conversation today, it's the stories. If we can share stories, women won't feel alone and they'll feel supported and they'll know that other women have shared things they've tried and what works and what doesn't work. This is a real social proof kind of industry, I think, women's health, where we want to know what works for other women, not just what an ad tells us works.
Yeah. That's very much aligned with how women make decisions too. That I love that social proof. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on and giving me the opportunity to share this information. It always helps me to be reminded. Yeah.